The night had fallen with a weight that seemed almost unnatural, smothering the land beneath a thick blanket of fog that crept low across the ground. The road was narrow and winding, the asphalt glistening faintly under the beam of the car's headlights, which cut through the mist like pale blades of trembling light. The hum of the engine was the only sound breaking the silence, steady and hollow, echoing against the empty stretch of countryside. Every now and then, a gust of wind would whisper through the trees, carrying with it a sound that wasn't quite the rustle of leaves, something softer, like a sigh that lingered too long. The driver tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles white in the dim glow of the dashboard. He had been driving for hours without passing a single car, house, or sign of life. The road felt endless, as if leading deeper into nowhere. The map on his phone had long since lost signal, and the world outside looked identical no matter how far he went. The forest on both sides seemed to close in tighter, the trees leaning closer as though they were listening. The fog grew denser as he pressed on, swallowing everything beyond the reach of his headlights. The air felt colder now, sharp and biting against the glass, and condensation began to creep across the windshield, like veins spreading over pale skin. He turned up the heater, but the chill only seemed to settle deeper into his bones. A sense of unease started to bloom in his chest, subtle at first, then slowly growing heavier with every mile. There was something oppressive about the silence, a stillness so absolute that even his thoughts seemed to echo. He rolled down the window slightly, hoping for a breath of fresh air, but what greeted him was a smell, faint yet distinct, damp earth, old wood, and something metallic, like rust or dried blood. It filled the car for just a second before fading again, leaving behind only the memory of its presence. He rolled the window up, trying to shake off the growing tension gnawing at the back of his neck. Up ahead, the fog parted slightly, and the road stretched out in a long, straight line into the darkness. He exhaled, relieved for even a brief moment of clarity. But as his eyes adjusted, he noticed something standing on the side of the road. Tall, motionless, perfectly still. It was difficult to make out through the haze, but there was no mistaking the outline of a figure. His heart gave a violent thud against his ribs. He blinked once and it was gone. The road was empty again. He leaned forward, squinting, trying to convince himself that it had only been a trick of the light, a shape conjured by the fog and his weary imagination. Yet, something deep inside told him otherwise. His skin prickled, and a cold sweat began to form on his temples. He wanted to speed up, to escape whatever he thought he saw, but a strange paralysis took hold of his foot. It hovered over the pedal, uncertain, as if afraid that sudden movement might draw something closer. He finally pressed down and accelerated, the engine growling as the car surged forward. The white lines on the road blurred beneath him, and for a few moments, he almost convinced himself that he was imagining everything. But then, something flickered in the rearview mirror, a shadow darting across the beam of his taillights, moving impossibly fast. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The shape was faint, distorted by the mist, but it seemed to follow at a distance, keeping pace with the car. His pulse hammered in his ears. He glanced again, and the mirror showed nothing but darkness. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. The air inside the car felt heavier, charged with a presence that wasn't his own. Every instinct screamed for him to leave that road. But there was nowhere to turn, no sign of a turnoff, no end to the endless ribbon of asphalt. The fog thickened until it became a moving wall of white, swirling like smoke illuminated by his headlights. The road beneath the tires felt narrower, rougher, and the familiar hum of the asphalt gave way to a strange, uneven vibration, as if the ground itself had changed texture. He slowed down, staring at the way the fog seemed to shift ahead, forming shapes that almost looked human before dissolving again. A whisper brushed against his ear, faint as a breath, and he turned instinctively. But the seat beside him was empty. His hands trembled on the wheel. The smell returned, stronger this time. That sickly metallic scent, mingled with something older, something rotten. The car's radio crackled suddenly, a burst of static that made him jump, followed by a low murmur of voices, overlapping, distorted, whispering in tones too soft to understand. He fumbled for the knob, turning it off, but the static continued for a moment longer, before fading into silence again. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat now, loud and erratic, drowning out the hum of the engine. The darkness outside seemed to pulse with a life of its own, moving closer each time he blinked. The mist pressed against the windows, curling like fingers searching for a way in. He wanted to scream, to call out, but his voice felt trapped, as though the air itself had turned to ice. Then, ahead on the road, his headlights flickered once, twice, and went out. The world plunged into total blackness. His heart stopped. He slammed the brakes, but the car didn't slow. Panic flooded through him, as he realized the wheel wasn't responding either. The road was gone. All he could see was darkness and the faint reflection of his own terrified face in the glass. And behind him, just barely visible in that reflection, was a shape. Tall, indistinct, standing directly in the middle of the road. The lights came back on without warning, blinding him for a moment. The road stretched empty once more, as though nothing had ever been there. The car slowed on its own, the wheel now moving freely beneath his hands. He took a shaky breath, feeling his chest rise and fall in uneven bursts. His fingers were numb, his lips pale, his mind reeling with questions he didn't dare answer. He wanted to pull over, to stop and gather himself, but the sides of the road were swallowed by darkness so complete that it felt alive. He pressed on, hoping for the faintest sign of life ahead. A gas station, a light, anything. Yet, mile after mile, the landscape remained unchanged. Endless trees, endless mist, endless silence. The road itself seemed to hum beneath him, vibrating softly as if whispering something only it could understand. He stole one last glance in the rearview mirror, and his heart froze. The shadow was back, closer this time, clearer, standing right where the light faded, staring directly into his reflection. Its outline was wrong, distorted, too tall, too thin, like a figure stretched beyond what should be human. Its head tilted slowly, unnaturally, and though there were no eyes visible, he could feel its gaze piercing through the mirror, cold and endless. His breath hitched, his body trembling as the fog began to thicken once again, curling around the car, swallowing the road, the trees, the world itself. And as the darkness consumed everything, he realized with a sinking terror that he could still see that shape. Not behind him anymore, but ahead, waiting patiently in the middle of the road, illuminated by the faint glow of his dying headlights.